So how many of you guys have to write surveys or do research as part of your product design job?
Yeah, thank you.
Right?
Thank you.
So then this talk will be helpful for you, hopefully. No, you guys, it's very valuable to know like how to ask questions properly and how to fill out, how to approach your users in a way that's not intimidating and will have direct them to give you more feedback and be able to answer your questions. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to Nick Inchausti from SurveyMonkey. He's a senior user researcher, and he'll give you tips about how to write a survey with impact and how to improve your surveys. So I'll pass it over to Nick, and thank you so much.
All right, thank you. All right, so we're going to talk about how to write surveys with impact, as it says. But before we get into that, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm the lead user researcher at SurveyMonkey. I usually focus on qualitative design research, and I also oversee a lot of our customer-facing surveys. And so being in charge of surveys at a survey company, you get a lot of scrutiny, so I have to really make sure the surveys are good. So let's start off with surveys. Thinking just about surveys in general, what comes to mind? Anyone getting super excited? Think it's fun? Sometimes surveys get a bad rep, and maybe your survey respondents might feel like this lady. And it's interesting to think about because with surveys, a lot of the experience that your respondents have depends on how well written the survey is. It depends on how the surveys are composed and how you write the questions and the order that you present them in. So let's reframe surveys a little bit. In the world of survey research, which is a real thing, there are survey researchers out there. We like to think about surveys as a conversation with a purpose. So that starts to sound a little bit more interesting, right? You're having a conversation with people that you want to get feedback from, and they're giving it to you. What's even more interesting is that you can have those conversations at scale with the survey, right? So you can get that feedback from your customers, from your potential customers, employees, even event attendees like tonight. And the question, though, is how do we make this engaging? How do we get this feedback engaging? Because what you're creating with your survey is an experience for your respondents, and the better experience you make, the more respondents are going to actually take the time to fill out your survey and complete your survey, and you're going to get more data that way, and that's going to save you time. So you need to really build your conversation or build your survey with your audience, and as any real conversation in real life, you kind of have to abide by some rules or laws that's really going to help it be effective. So if we just met and started a conversation, I wouldn't ask you your birth date as the first question. No, we get to know each other a little bit. So just like a conversation, there are some ways to write a survey even better and have your respondent go down respondent lane in a very neat flow that makes sense as you're kind of building your own survey land here. One aspect that I'm going to focus on today in particular is the qualitative aspects of surveys. So a lot of people kind of forget that surveys can be qualitative as well. You can get that information from that, and it can add that spark of color to your analysis as you're looking at your results. So what do we mean, or what do I mean when I talk about close-ended, open-ended, qualitative? Let's get this straight a little bit. So when I'm talking about closed-ended survey questions, I'm talking about multiple choice questions, rating scales. These are question types that the respondent has all the answers and they're just kind of choosing or picking from. And open-ended responses are kind of synonymous with the qualitative research aspect of it, where people can write in freely and you can really see their voice there. So when we kind of put these two together, we can get some more interesting data from our customers. But there are some rules about kind of using these qualitative or open response questions in your surveys. And so that's what we'll focus on today. And there are kind of three main principles when putting these qualitative questions in your surveys, and we'll get more in depth as we go, but just in general, less is more. You want to build up to them, and you really want to set expectations of what you're looking to get out of them from your respondents. So let's dive into the first one. So if you're looking at the completion rate of a survey, just in general of surveys, the more questions that you add to your survey, the more the response rate or the completion rate is going to go down. So less people are going to actually get through all of your questions if you add more questions. That makes sense, right? And what happens when we add qualitative or open response questions? It drops by about 10%, just if you add one of those questions into your survey. So that's really shows us that we have to be careful about how we use those qualitative surveys, and that what it's really showing us is that it's hard for our respondents to answer these types of questions. It takes them time, it takes mental energy, and it can be very effective in our analysis, but we just have to be careful of that and position them in a way that is smart and makes it easy for them to answer. So continuing on here, the location of these open-ended questions actually really matters. So if we're looking at just starting a survey, the first question, you have one that has a multiple choice question and one that has an open response question. Well, particularly as the first question, the open response really creates this high barrier of entry. It has little context of what we're really looking for because respondents are not really engaged in taking the survey at this point. So if you were to compare a multiple choice versus open-end, the open-end would have a drop of about a 5% response rate right off the bat. So 5% of your population would just not finish after that first question. So you have to be careful about the positioning as well. All right, so what can we do? So we can, a good way to combat this or to really make sense of our questions, open-ended questions, are to pair them with closed-ended questions. And it really helps kind of provide more context, both for the survey taker and for you if you're looking at the analysis. And we have the famous buddy here, Bill Clinton's dog, but let's get a real example. So we have an NPS question up here, which is a rating scale. We want to see how likely people are to recommend an event, or this could be a company. And if you ask this question, you get a rating or a number back, which is great. And you can kind of benchmark this number as you go. But what if we paired this with an open response question type and ask them why did they select this rating? So now what we get is we get a number and we get to understand why they selected that rating. So we can know why did people like it or why did they not like it. And we add these all together and we get insights, right? We get insights. You get insights and you get insights. All right. So another part is really to set expectations, both for yourself when you're working on your surveys and for the respondents answering your surveys. So one thing is that we think that we don't need every question to be required, especially these open response questions that have proven to be hard for respondents. If the respondent doesn't have anything to say, we need to respect that and let them go through the survey. And it's going to be better for the analysis as well because you're going to actually get back data from people who wanted to answer and who had something to say versus someone just typing gibberish and just kind of getting in the way of the analysis. And this example in particular is particularly bad because it's saying, who are you, which is very open and we're not really setting any context of what we're looking for. They could write a whole paragraph they could put their dating profile in there. We don't know exactly what is being asked of us as a respondent. And so here, we really just need to be as specific as possible. And so this example is much clearer. We're looking for 3 words to describe this person. And so the respondent knows, hey, I only need to write 3 words. The person that's looking at the analysis knows that they're looking for people who wrote 3 words. And so it really lightens the load for the respondent as far as their mental capacity as they're going through, and it makes it easier for you as well when you're looking at the results. So just to sum up kind of the 5 main tips is you want to use these open-ended questions sparingly, only when they're really important, because they lead to lower completion rates if they're not done effectively. You really want to build up to them and not start off with them. And you want to try to group the close-ended and the open-ended questions together, which is going to help you and both the respondent try to get more context. Don't always require a response, and try to be as specific as possible. So one tip as well, if you don't even want to bother with these qualitative aspects of your survey, you can always stick this question at the end, asking if people are interested in providing additional feedback, and you can follow up with them via email, over the phone, and this is something that's very effective that I do to help even schedule some research sessions. So this is great for surveys. And so at the end, hopefully this will be your survey respondent and you looking at all of the survey responses that you get that are wonderful when you're writing all these surveys. So thank you very much.
Oh, we have.
Oh, yes.
Do you have, there we go. You get a question.
Hey, do you have any tips for evaluating qualitative data aside from like a word cloud? Or like presenting every single one of them to who you're presenting your results to?
Yeah, so for surveys specifically, I think a good way is to look at trends, but to present it is to maybe show a specific quote that matches that trend. So like this is a good example, this particular quote is a good example of people who didn't like this feature, and show it that way.
Do you have any particular advice about trying to engage pretty inactive users in survey and how to account for either they're already really disengaged with your product, or how incentives might impact the quality of the responses you're getting?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think it all depends on how you reach out to the survey takers. And so finding the right channel to communicate with those people, maybe in product surveys when they log off or through email. It really just depends on how you can best reach these people. And sorry, what was the second part?
I think you covered it.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Hi, very close. So when you reach people with survey, you can reach a lot of people, but you don't ask them too many questions, right? When you reach people for one-on-one conversations, you can reach really small amount of people if you're one solo person doing the research, and ask them a lot of questions. So how do you find the balance between those two?
Yeah, and I think it's just the balance of the qualitative and the quantitative as you see fit, right? So you can use surveys to get that qualitative information by helping you set up those one-on-ones. I think it's just always a balance of what are the questions that you need to answer. Do you need to know if this is going to be something that's just more attitudinal feedback, or do you need to be very sure that this is going to hit the market in a specific way? So quant versus qual, I think that's always the thought in putting those two together. Thank you, Nick. Thank you.
Thank you.